Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to CLS Social Studies. All right, today we're going to dive briefly into the shallow end. Well, that's not good. Jump into the shallow end. That's really not good either. Walk into the shallow end and talk about the Vietnam War. We are not going to dive deep into the Vietnam War because if you dive deep into it, you could talk about it for a really, really long time. I'm going to hit the important parts for you that we're going to have to cover in class. All right, so the Vietnam War. Remember, we said Diem is killed in South Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh, the communism of the North, is trying to spread communism. They're trying to liberate South Vietnam and make it one Vietnam again into a communist country. However, in August of 1964, Northern Vietnamese torpedo boats reported to have attacked U.S. ships. Not really sure if that information is true. We think it might be true. It may be true. People might be saying it's true in order to get us into war. Well, that's how President Johnson sees it. President Johnson says, hey, if there's torpedo boats and they're attacking our ships, that's an act of war, and we're going to go to war. And what Congress does is they pass something called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. And what the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was like a blank check giving the president, President Johnson, the authority to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack forces of the United States. And that causes trouble. That is bad news. So remember, we sent the advisors in 1964. Remember, we're not at war yet. Well, now we are sending combat troops into South Vietnam in March of 1965. This war is not like any other war that the United States has fought. Every time post-World War I the United States gets into another war, it's fought differently every time. During Vietnam War, we have something called Operation Rolling Thunder, which is a series of heavy, sustained airstrikes, bombs on targets in North Vietnam, right, to fight this Vietnam War. They are targeting industries and the Ho Chi Minh Trail. If you look at the picture there on the right-hand side, you see some countries like South Vietnam, Cambodia, North Vietnam, Thailand. That dark line going down the middle is what we call the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And that is a supply route from North Vietnam into supplying the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. Now you'll see how it doesn't just go from North Vietnam straight through the center of South Vietnam. It goes through Laos. It goes through Cambodia. This was a reason. This was a reason for this. The United States said that they were not going to take military action against Laos or Cambodia. So if we weren't going to take military action against Laos or Cambodia, that's where the Ho Chi Minh Trail went, right outside the outskirts of South Vietnam. So the North Vietnam was supplying the Viet Cong through this Ho Chi Minh Trail, which the United States couldn't touch. If you look right there at the bottom, by late 1968, more than 1 million tons of explosives have been dropped on North and South Vietnam, more than any time during World War II. That is unbelievable that we dropped so much bombs down on Vietnam during Operation Rolling Thunder. So it wasn't even that. You have to remember that Vietnam is a rainforest. Okay, so Vietnam has a lot of dense jungles and it's very, very wet. President Johnson pursues this policy of escalation to escalate it, just keep sending more guys in. So increase your involvement of the war. And by 1968, more than 500,000 American troops are now serving in Vietnam. This was not supposed to get this big, but it did. So now you have the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, fighting in the jungles, this guerrilla warfare. And American troops are trying to take this land. And we couldn't do it with this jungle. So we started using chemical warfare. And you use something like napalm, which is on the bottom, or Agent Orange, to defoliate these dense forests. Agent Orange is like a chemical that would land on the brush and it would just kill it. Right? Now, don't forget, this is landing on the people too, civilians and Northern Vietnamese soldiers, and it's destroying their skin, it's burning their skin, it's giving them cancers. Napalm was like a jelly type of substance that you can fire out or load up into a bomb. And when it exploded, this jelly went everywhere and it caught fire and it just burned everything in its path. It was devastating to the Vietnamese people. Well, the Viet Cong counteracted all of these defoliates, and what they did was they would burrow tunnels in Vietnam, and that's how they would fight. They would literally pop out of these tunnels and just start killing everybody in sight, and then go drop down underneath in the tunnels again. So they had over about 30,000 miles of tunnels in Vietnam. Right? This was not a traditional type war that was being fought. General Westmoreland, right there, he commanded the U.S. ground forces, and these type of missions that they were completing now in the Vietnam War were called search and destroy missions. They would go and search for these enemy camps and then destroy them with air power and air raids and fire and napalm and just killing everything in sight. Now, the problem with that is fighting in these jungles and these villages in South Vietnam, you're killing South Vietnamese citizens as well. You're not just killing the northern Vietnamese, army. And that was a big problem during the Vietnam War. American soldiers were not knowing who they were killing. I mean, think about the pressure that these guys must have been under. You're fighting in a jungle. You can't see your enemy at all. Right? You just have bombs being dropped from the skies. Just, they're radioing over coordinates to get to bomb. Sometimes the pilots miss, right? So now you're worried about bombs getting dropped on you, bombs getting dropped on your enemy, the Agent Orange getting spread and napalm, and it's landing on our soldiers as well. This is the type of problems that were going on in the Vietnam War. So the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army were challenging their opponents. They were the ones who knew the region. They had the knowledge of the guerrilla warfare. They've been there. They know how to do it. They had a continual supply of troops at the ready. They received weapons and supplies from the communist Soviets and communist China. So they were all, the Northern Vietnamese were getting supplied heavily. They had all the right things going for them. The civilians of South Vietnam, like I said, caught in the middle of all this action that's going on. The Viet Cong were killing people they believed were cooperating with the South Vietnamese government. The U.S. and the Southern Vietnamese forces were attacking these villages who they thought were helping the Viet Cong, right? And this is undermining the goal of the U.S. trying to win support from the Southern Vietnamese. How are you supposed to go into a town and let the Southern Vietnamese people tell you where the bad guys are if you just keep going in and killing people? Hear about the soldiers who fought in the Vietnam War. More than 2 million American soldiers fought in Vietnam. The average age, look at that, 18 to 21 years old. They were able to fight in war, but they weren't able to vote yet. 25% of them were drafted from minority groups and poor families. 1 out of every 4 soldiers was either a minority or poor. These troops over there faced the harshest of conditions, 70 to 90 pounds of equipment on their backs, 100-degree heat, rainstorms. They never knew when they were going to counter enemy fire, landmines, booby traps. They rarely controlled any land that they took. Believe it or not, this war was fought by numbers. The presidents were saying that the Americans were winning the war because there were more Vietnamese dying. Okay? Every time they took a land holding, the United States would sacrifice men to go up a hill to capture a hill. They captured this hill. They thought there was going to be thousands of Viet Cong up there. The Viet Cong escaped through their tunnels. Thousands of guys died. We captured this hill. All right. Now, except for keeping that hill, they're like, all right, pull back. We don't need that hill anymore. They're not up there. So it's not even like they gained control of this land and kept it. They just gained control of land, sacrificed a bunch of guys, and then left. Now, January 30th, 1968 is the turning point of the Vietnam War. Not turning point to victory, the turning point of us going to get the heck out of there. This was the Vietnamese New Year called Tet. And in previous years, during Tet, there was a ceasefire. Nobody fought on Tet, okay? Now, it's kind of like Christmas, right? During World War II, you wouldn't fight on Christmas. I mean, that goes all the way back to the beginning of wartime. Remember, like Washington crossing to Delaware? Unexpected. Nobody fought on Christmas. So the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces launched something called the Tet Offensive, and this is that turning point of the war. Now, the Tet Offensive was planned for a long time. Viet Cong were continuously moving and infiltrating the South, getting themselves prepared for this offensive. It's a surprise attack all over South Vietnam, all happening at a coordinated time. Boom, time is now, let's attack. They attacked the embassy in Saigon, which was South Vietnam's capital. They showed that the Viet Cong were still strong and determined to win this war, which is why Americans were like, whoa, if they're willing to do this, what else are they willing to do? How strong are they? We need to get out of there. The attack was successfully fought off by the Americans and the South Vietnamese, and we did reacquire those territories that were lost during a Tet Offensive, but it was overall seen as a loss. Like, oh my gosh, I thought we were winning this war, and now this happens? So in February of 1968, finally, Congress denies President Johnson's request for more military troops, and support for the war was dying. This is why it was the turning point of the war. We really started having people not supporting the war. Television, this is the first war that is televised, so everybody could see what's going on in Vietnam. People were shocked about what they saw in Vietnam. The napalm effect, the Agent Orange effect, the people dying, the blowing up of everybody. I mean, they saw this live on television. And you have back in America people who are divided on the war effort. You have hawks. These are supporters of the war. They called for increased spending. They wanted more soldiers going over there. Think about a hawk. It's a predatory bird. It attacks. And then you had the doves, the symbol of peace. Those are the people who thought that the war was draining money. They wanted to end the war. The money should be spent at home. We should, just pull out of Vietnam and let it be what it is. In March of 1968, and we're going to cover this in the next chapter as well, but we're going to touch on it here because it really affects how the end of the war is seen upon Americans. A company of U.S. soldiers massacred hundreds of unarmed people in the village of My Lai, and the My Lai massacre caused many Americans to question the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War.